Here are some of the things that you can do with what you've learned today. Let me go back. Is increase contact with people that from you. And this is a call to action for myself and people that are different from me. I think that the old saying that birds of a feather flock together, you naturally gravitate to people that look like you, have the same values. It's just a natural. But in order for us to grow, really to push ourselves to understand a different reality. And so increase contact with people that are different from you. That neighbor that you see and you just kind of wave hi, but you never really speak to them, but they might be a different culture or different sexual identity or something like that. Like, hey, how are you doing? Just developing a relationship in the workplace. Now, again, we're talking in light of COVID-19. Is there a way that we can have courageous conversations, and maybe you partner a member of your board with a frontline employee, or you partner a member of your board with someone of a different background on your staff, and creating human connections, because the way these unconscious biases are dismantled and racism is dismantled is through relationship and trust, and seeing the humanness in one another. And how do we get there? Having real conversations. And what we often find is that there is some commonality when we sit down with people who are different from us, who we've been socialized to believe differently about. Have intentional conversations around bias and racism with your children or the young people that you serve that are in your life. These kids are experiencing it in school. They're being bullied based on things they don't have control over. So rather than shying away from the conversation with George Floyd, how many times do we see the officer with the foot on his neck? How many times did we see the riots around the Rashard Brooks shooting? These kids see this. They live in these communities. And so they have questions. And really, what does that mean for me living in this community? How do I have a healthy relationship with the police? Are all police bad? Like, really, or that not all of them are bad? How do we see the differences even with people that we've been socialized scared of? And so these are the conversations, being intentional about teaching your kids, because if we're operating in our community today that everything is inherited, how do we break the generational curse of bias and racism? We have to do something a little bit different. So we have to be intentional about our peers and the generations that are coming behind us. So that's another tool. If you know you have bias against a group of people, challenge yourself by watching and reading stories about a different narrative. I think that's why imagery of minorities is so important in social media and mainstream entertainment, because you get to hear different stories, not just one narrative of one community. And I think we're doing a really good job. I'm holding on as a perfect example of the work that they're doing to get different narratives out there. I was that little girl at 12 and 13 years old doing Bollywood dancing because I loved learning about other cultures, and that was me. And so and I'm from the Bay Area, so it was like we were all living together. So I would, want to learn more about Filipino culture, or my Jewish girlfriends, what their practices were. And so, but that was a value that was cultivated in my family. So even though we lived in a predominantly Black neighborhood, my parents always encouraged me to not be afraid to go and hang out with my girlfriends on the better side of town, the affluent side of town. And it gave me cultural passport education. So these are all things that we can do just to challenge our narratives that pop up in our heads when we interact with people that are different from us.